The most intriguing thing to me overall this year is that while the top three stand out, you can make a case for about 20 teams being number four. And that's pretty much like what my midsummer SP Plus projections were suggesting is like the difference between number 3 Georgia and number 4 Michigan was the same as the difference between number 4 Michigan and number 23 Florida.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and my guest today needs no introduction in the football analytics world. My guest is Bill Connelly of ESPN. He is a college football analytics expert. In this episode, he breaks down his top 3 college football teams in 2022, and these 3 teams are in a tier of their own. He gives a surprising answer when I asked him about his most intriguing team for the upcoming season. And then he broke down a number of dark horse Heisman candidates. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that gives data-driven betting information that is 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Smarter sports betting in under 5 minutes. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcast episodes. This is an education for your ears. To get this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for sports betting information based on data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank, all one word, .com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Bill Connelly of ESPN. He is the godfather of college football analytics. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me once again.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. Bill, I've started out these conversations with you in so many ways, as I don't know how many times you've been on the show, so I thought I'd mix it up. What brings you joy about college football?
I would say any sport really, but I mean, obviously college football does it plenty. It's just when you're starting to feel like you're seeing something you haven't seen before. Just that feeling of this, whatever it is, good, bad, weird, whatever it is, just a general kind of exhilaration of, okay, like this is, I haven't seen this episode. This is very, very exciting. I want to see how this ends. It does happen. I mean, it can happen in any sport. But the fact that college football can still do that to you after you've watched it a very long time. I mean, it's always played by 18 to 22-year-olds with a pointy ball, and weirdness is always going to be pretty close to the surface, and that's what makes it a lot of fun, I think.
Absolutely. Like on the field, what would you say the last amazing thing that you've never seen before would be, just as an example? Well,
I mean, the very last thing was probably the Keely Ringo interception that ended all but ended the national title game. That was a plot twist we're seeing. Bryce Young goes deep. It kind of in your head. We've all been trained to assume Alabama's going to win, and they usually do. But the camera pans, and that's not at all what you expected to see. And then not only does he pick it off, he's racing down the sideline, and Kirby Smart's telling him to go down, and all this other stuff. Like that was a really, really fun moment. And Georgia fans waiting as long as they did for that moment probably made it even better.
Absolutely, that was quite a moment, and we'll get into those 2 teams a little bit later in this episode. But first, we also see amazing things off the field in college football, the latest of which being 2 teams from Los Angeles joining the Big Ten Conference, which resides in the Midwest. What do you make of all that change?
Well, I mean, I think, this was forecasted a long ago when, the original name of the Big Ten was the Western Conference, right? It took a while to put all the pieces together on that one.
But that was wasn't that a different era where, like, legitimately, Chicago was the West, and that's
it was an extremely different era when that But it all comes full circle. This one has messed with my brain a lot more than OU Texas to SEC did, and I guess it's just simply because Oklahoma, the SEC was already in Texas, and Oklahoma is glued to Texas, so it still felt like a natural extension. This one still feels really weird to me. Just the idea of like annual UCLA Illinois games, but UCLA is not going to play Cal anymore. This one has definitely been a little harder to imagine, but I mean, I guess for me, writing a bunch of preview material and everything else, I've been able to distract myself because we don't have to worry about this for 2 more years. But logistically, I'm struggling. But no, I what I wrote about at the time, right after it happened, was that as big a move as this is, the next one is the biggest. If there, assuming there is a next one.
Come on.
Whether it's between SEC and the SEC. Well, here's the thing. Obviously, Notre Dame, if they move, that's enormous. But what else happens next? I don't have any idea, because Notre Dame's the only name left on the board that. Yeah, and you'll have to apologize. I have to apologize. I'm hoarse at 8 a.m. But Notre Dame is the only name on the board that is guaranteed to increase like that per school revenue for whatever conference it joins. So like they join the Big Ten tomorrow. Whatever Penn State was going to make in annual media rights, it's going to go up. Anybody else they add, that might not be the case. Oregon and Washington, it would make much sense for them to add Oregon and Washington, or Oregon, Washington, Cal, Stanford, have that whole western wing of the conference. That's all fine. But you add those teams, and Penn State's number is probably going to go down a little bit, even by adding those markets. So that's what I'm most curious about. If this is simply about adding teams that can make everybody more money, then we could be about done, honestly. It's just there are plenty of other good programs out there and plenty of other reasons to add programs besides just pure annual revenue that, there obviously could be more moves. There are plenty of other good programs. Once we get closer to the ACC's, their grant of rights expiring, and, Florida State, Miami, Clemson, whoever, like that, those teams might become more attractive. But even for the SEC, it's not a guarantee that Florida State, Clemson, and Miami would add to that number for the SEC. It might, but we don't know that number. And so that's what I'm most curious about. We're not guaranteed to expand these conferences, these 2 big conferences anymore anytime soon, but we could. and when that happens, especially as we get closer to the ACC, that grant of rights, maybe it will happen, but I just don't know if and when and who and what and all that. And once the Big Ten and SEC cross that 16 team barrier, that's when things could get really weird. It's already pretty weird, but it is
pretty weird.
That's kind of where I'm at. And the timeline for this, I just have absolutely no idea. So that's always kind of fun, not having any idea what's next, but I really don't have any idea what's next.
Right. And I think part of it was that they kept a pretty good lid on this idea that UCLA and USC were going to Big Ten, as far as I've read. And so it was kind of a surprise when
That's been the biggest thing over the last year. All these rumors are, we can hear any rumor we want. We immediately heard, Oregon and Washington talking to the Big Ten and this and that, and Big 12 trying to invade and all these other things. But the 2 biggest moves that have ever happened, we had no warning about them whatsoever. Like the morning of is when we found out about it. And so, among other things, that's kind of taught me to just ignore all rumors, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And, we don't have to anticipate it at all, because we probably won't.
Exactly. I find it very interesting that Notre Dame absolutely moves the needle, but Clemson doesn't, right? Because that's just the way college football is, right? You have the cachet of Notre Dame, almost century long name recognition that they have in a program like Clemson that has literally dominated the last 6-7 years, right?
Right. And they could, it is possible that adding Clemson would add to that revenue figure. Notre Dame's the only one guaranteed to. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, which is exactly the point. Like
Yeah.
that's still interesting to me, the way things work and the way, just how long-term name recognition matters as opposed
Yeah.
to recent
Very,
performance.
very, very long term name recognition.
Right. So I guess the question is, I mean, you've already kind of answered this in the sense that you don't know if there's more moves, but we've been talking about this for a couple years about when college football ends up with a super league of 30-ish teams that may or may not exclude the rest of college football, right? So, when the big tech companies like Apple and Amazon get in and make a type of offer, a streaming offer that the SEC and the Big Ten can't refuse. I presume you still think that's a possibility and part of the uncertainty with college football.
Well, it's a possibility, but I mean, I kind of expected Amazon and Apple to have done more by now. Like, obviously, maybe they end up part of this Big Ten deal. We'll see exactly how that all shakes out, but it kind of almost seems like they're not at this point. And, if you'd asked me 3-4 years ago, I would have assumed by this point that we'd have seen more than like Apple TV getting involved with MLS in like a baseball game or whatever that situation is with Major League Baseball. I kind of expected them to be further down the road. So I'm not going to really count on them at this point to do anything wild. I realize Amazon is getting involved with NFL and they threw crazy money at whatever announcers they could rope in. And so like, obviously they're capable. I just expected them to have done more by now. So that's part of it. But I do think the idea of like a 30, 40, whatever team, quote unquote, super league is going to require TV driving it because, again, the way things have worked to date, there are only so many more moves that the Big Ten and SEC can make that would really, really make them dramatically more valuable. And so they're not on their own. They're not going to do it. And of course, the other option that we always talk about is like, well, they could start booting teams. They could, boot Vanderbilt for Clemson or whatever. But that's if they're left to their own devices, they're not going to do that because that would require other conference members to vote Vanderbilt out, knowing they could be next, and that's not going to happen. So it would have to be a TV situation where a network or an entity of some sort comes to the table and says, we will pay you all. We're going to invite these 40 teams and we're going to make you all $350 million a year to be a minor league. And now, I don't see that happening. I think right now we talk a lot about Super League, and that's a soccer term, obviously. I think what I wrote about at the time after the USC's UCLA deal was more, it's not a super league. We're just headed to the Champions League where the Premier League and La Liga dominate the competition, but everybody's still invited to the table. And that's right now, that's what it looks like. Obviously the future Big Ten and future SEC are going to have most of college football's powers. And obviously those teams are going to be making more money than whoever's left in the ACC or whatever. But you can still build good programs in those conferences, and your conference champion will still make the playoff at the end of the year, however many teams that playoff has. And I think that's probably most likely right now. But yeah, the 40-team vision is definitely on the table.
Yeah, I think the Champions League, kind of the setup we have right now, does make a ton of sense. Everyone is still getting a ton of money. But I mean, I've heard the figure of what, like $1 billion for total each year for a super league of 30-ish teams, which is exactly what the SEC and the Big Ten are right now.
Right, exactly. We have to adjust. We're quickly having to adjust our that figure is ridiculous because it's all happening anyway. Like the Big Ten's next deal is going to be that ridiculous already. So it's like the Dr. Evil $1 million thing or whatever. Like we have to adjust what we think of as crazy because the numbers are just going to get crazier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bill, let's get back to the 2022 season. You have, I guess your S&P ratings are from a little bit earlier. They'll be re-released later this month. But let's talk about your top three teams because they're in a tier above everyone else. And, it's actually not Alabama or Georgia at the top. You have Ohio State. So I know this offense is going to be good, but maybe convince me that the defense can hold up their end of the bargain.
Well, the biggest thing the defense has going for it is it doesn't have to be like a top 5 defense because that offense is going to be so ridiculous that if Ohio State has a top 20 defense, they're one of the two best teams in the country. So the bar is lower. I think the most interesting thing, the reason Ohio State is number one, I'm not completely, once I put out the update, I have a few tweaks to make for the final projections here in another week and a half. But if they're not number one, they're going to be a very close number two. And the biggest thing they have going for them is, each year I put out my returning production figures. And basically, while the teams at the very top of the returning production rankings are all but guaranteed to improve, and the teams at the bottom are all but guaranteed to regress. When we're talking about national title teams, when we're talking about Alabama, if Alabama ranks in the 80s in returning production, it probably means they're the best team in the country, because those teams that recruit that well and lose that many pros in every single year, they are playing by different rules in that regard. They're never going to be as experienced as, a team returning 20 starters or whatever, because they have too many future pros, and they're going to replace those guys with other future pros and win big anyway. But Ohio State ranks 25th in returning production this year. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a team, one of those genuine blue blood recruiting teams that, a top three team from a given year. I don't know if I've ever seen a team rank in the 20s in returning production. They return, obviously they lost a couple of receivers. A couple of very good receivers. Hard to even pretend to worry about that when they return everyone else.
Well, so let me stop you there real quick, right? Because they lost 2 first-round receivers in Chris Olave and the other guy, Garrett Wilson, right? And I think those 2 receivers have both said that they were not the best receiver on the team last year, right, which is number one. So Jackson Smith-Njigba is just flat amazing. Yep. And usually we kind of, people like you that are deeply invested in these rosters year over year say something to the effect like, well, this guy has to step up, yada, yada, yada. But it's almost like we just assume that they're going to be good because we think the next couple of guys are so good. And you've said this, and Bud Elliott has said this. I feel like it's another level of respect for the program.
Right. Yeah. The numbers for the Ohio State receivers are hilarious. Like, I've learned over time, we have Sports Info Solutions data that we play with, and both SIS and PFF use yards per route run a lot for receivers.
Yeah, great stat.
It's a lovely number. It really does kind of combine like your consistency with just how much you're getting used in the offense and your explosiveness and everything else. And I've kind of learned over time that if you average over 2 yards per route run, you're a good receiver, like undoubtedly a valuable receiver. That's not the best figure in the world, but it's a very good one. Chris Olave last year averaged 2.3 yards per route run. Garrett Wilson averaged 3, which would lead just about every team in the country. Jackson Smith-Njigba averaged 4.1 yards per route run. He ran 393 routes. He was targeted on about a third of those. He caught 95 balls out of the slot, which there are some explosive slots in the world, but usually the guys who are catching 100 passes or so are the quick pass kind of 10.5 yards per catch guys. He averaged almost 17 yards per catch. He got open anytime he wanted to. The only reason his stats weren't better is he had to share the load with Wilson and Olave. And he still averaged over 4 yards per route run. So yeah, he was the best. He was the best on the team last year. But then, once you have a guy like that, then obviously other guys will need to step up. But like Emeka Egbuka, sophomore, one of many blue chip sophomores, 3.4 yards per route run. He barely even played. He ran 57 routes all year, caught 9 balls for 191 yards.
What? That's kind of insane. And they have Marvin Harrison Jr. as well.
Harrison Jr. wasn't he was only at 1.1. He didn't get involved that much. So he's going to need to step up, but he's a blue chip sophomore whose name is Marvin Harrison. Odds are pretty good. He's going to be pretty good. So yeah, but even beyond that, obviously you return CJ Stroud, you return Trevion Henderson, plus other blue chip running backs. You lose 2 All-American linemen. That is not nothing. But you return everybody else from the line. And again, you've recruited well, so you get the benefit of the doubt. Offense is going to be amazing. It just is. Like that's the surest thing in the country, pretty much. But obviously, again, the defense is what's going to have to improve, and they will have experience to their advantage. Their top 3 linebackers were sophomores last year. Their top 2, the 2 guys who played the most in the secondary were a freshman and a sophomore. They were extremely young, and that doesn't solve all your problems. The line wasn't that young, and that was probably the biggest issue they had, is physical teams could push them around. So there's no guarantee they're going to improve and be the level they were at in about 2019 or so. But again, they don't have to be. They just have to be like a top 20 defense, and I bet they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have faith in the new coordinator to at least improve them a little bit on the defense?
I love Jim Knowles. I think my biggest question with Jim Knowles is, at both Duke and Oklahoma State, it took him 2-3 years to really start to put the pieces together that he needed. Now, obviously, the number of blue chippers he's inheriting at Ohio State, it's more than the number of blue chippers Oklahoma State has signed in 25 years. But so maybe that talent makes up the difference. But he had a very unique. At Oklahoma State last year, he had maybe one of the best sets of defensive ends in the country. They had 4 awesome defensive ends last year. They had 2 of the most sure tackling linebackers in the country, and they had just a nasty physical secondary. And the mindset of this team, he's going to have to change pretty dramatically. He had chips on shoulders everywhere he looked, and it's harder to build that when you've got blue chippers, obviously. So yeah, I don't think he'll have, if he stays there 10 years, whatever the best defense in that span is, it's not going to be this year's defense. He'll need a few years to really get it to be the best it can be. Again, I think he can clear a top 20 bar, and that's really all he needs to do this year.
Ohio State has been a factory for defensive backs over the last decade. Doesn't seem like necessarily this crop is going to fulfill that, or is it?
Well, I think it's probably encouraging that Denzel Burke, a freshman, was their best DB last year. His numbers were pretty solid. He had a pick. He had 11 breakups. He had, he allowed a 41.1 QBR when he was the primary coverage guy. That's one of the stats we get to play with. And so, I mean, that's all very encouraging. But Ronnie Hickman, safety, was fine. The other cornerback, Cameron Brown, was fine. There are a lot of fine pieces there, but when your best guy's a freshman, that's usually not a good thing unless that freshman's, Darryl Stingley Jr. basically. Derek Stingley.
Yeah.
Darryl Stingley was, sorry.
We got you.
But again, I think the front is the major issue. They the 4 most physical teams on their schedule push them around. And now 3 other top 5 linemen are gone. Teron Vincent and Zach Harrison, a couple blue chip seniors who have shown potential, but haven't really put it all together. They're going to have to put it all together. It's going to be surrounded by sophomores and freshmen otherwise. So that's really where my question is. I think this isn't the best Ohio State secondary, but it'll be good enough, especially if Burke, takes a step forward after a pretty good year.
Bill, you mentioned that returning starter production is one of the elements that go into your preseason model. What are the other 2, just so we can be clear about how that works?
Yeah, so it's returning production, it's recruiting, recent recruiting, and just recent history, basically. The biggest pieces of the equation are basically how good were you last year, and the adjustment for your amount of returning production. Those are the 2 biggest pieces, but there's a weighted history piece. So 2 years ago counts, 3 years ago counts a little bit less, 5 years ago barely counts, but it's in there a little bit, just as a program health evaluation, more or less. And then you get, what is it, 20% of the formula is based on recent recruiting, mostly last year's class, but a little bit the couple of years before as well, as kind of a way of saying here's what you return production wise. Here's the caliber of the guy who's replacing the lost production. So that's kind of the goal there.
And Ohio State is doing just fine in the recruiting.
Just fine, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Let's move on to Alabama, national title runner-up last season. And it seems like kind of an interesting year for Nick Saban in the sense that he's produced more NFL wide receivers than probably any other program in recent years. But it doesn't necessarily, he went to the transfer portal to kind of replace who he lost from last season. So what's going on there?
Yeah, Alabama, like I saw Saban kind of caught hell a couple weeks ago for saying something to the effect of like, well, we were in a rebuild last year, or something to that effect.
I mean,
he's right.
he's
They
right.
were.
Yeah.
Like his 2020 team was his best ever at Alabama, and he lost a ton of guys. He had a new quarterback, a new running back, new receiving core for the most part. Like it was absolutely a rebuilding year for Alabama, and they're the only, just like it was in that I think it was 2015. They were rebuilding that year too, and they won a national title. They are the one school that can do that, and but they were I'm not going to say smoke and mirrors last year by any means, but they were not as sound last year as they've been at other times in Saban's era, and they got by a little bit more. They won more one-score games than I think they ever have in Saban's tenure. They really kind of scraped by more or less. They ended up third in SP Plus. I think once I get a little update worked in here in the next week or so, they'll end up having been second last year, but they still weren't first, which is kind of where they spent most of the last 12 years. And that for Alabama was not their best team. So now you head into 2022, you have the two best players in the country in Bryce Young and Will Anderson, who if the Heisman really went to the best player in the country, Anderson would have won it last year and would probably win it this year. But they have that. They've got, their offensive line should be solid, obviously. They've got at least a couple of proven pieces and a couple more who will inevitably break out. But I think their defense is now more experienced and potentially ready to be their best defense in about 5 years. Not only because of Anderson, but, Dallas Turner, if Will Anderson doesn't, finish in the top 2 or 3 of the Heisman this year with all the hype he's getting, it might be because Dallas Turner stole too many of his sacks. But they've got the best pair of pass rushers in the country. They've got 2 senior safeties. Their defensive line is in good shape. They do have to rely, though, on Eli Ricks, LSU cornerback transfer, who was kind of starting to look like an elite guy last year before he got hurt. And like you mentioned, there are 3 transfers on offense that are going to have to kind of prop up a rebuilt receiving core. Jahmyr Gibbs, running back, good, nice, versatile guy who's going to catch a lot of passes. He's just absurdly fast. I think that was Nick Saban's quote from the spring is, can't coach speed. And he's got it. And then 2 receivers, Tyler Harrell from Louisville and Jermaine Burton from Georgia. They're big play guys, averaged almost 15 yards a target each. That yards per route run number, Harrell was at 2.9 and Burton was at 2.4. Very good guys. And I think this is a continuation of each year we see them lean a little bit more on speed and a little less on, girth. And this seems to be kind of a continuation of that. So both of those guys have to come through. JoJo Earl's hurt. One of the sophomore blue chippers, he's hurt and he's going to miss a little time. Ja'Cory Brooks is very well touted sophomore receiver, but he didn't do much last year. Lots of guys who have potential, but they probably will need all 3 of those transfers to come through at a pretty solid level.
Is it just that there was a little bit of blip in 5-star receivers recruiting?
I don't think there's any evidence of that as much as just the impact of the guys losing not just receivers, but losing Devontae Smith, right? Mac Jones was, from a numbers perspective, the best quarterback they had there, and they lost him. I think it was just that the production of the guys they lost was so ridiculous. And, the drop off in terms of experience was pretty stark, more stark than normal. I think that was the main reason. Obviously, bringing in Jameson Williams and having him turn out to be one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in the country, that helped. That wasn't too bad. But I think it was just that. Like even a Saban team that recruits top 2 classes every year, even they can fall victim to a certain amount of turnover of specifically high caliber guys.
Alabama's defense, for a while was, you could just kind of pencil them in as the best defense in the nation. It hasn't been that way for a while, right? By your metrics?
Yeah, it is. I do think this is what has made Nick Saban not only the best coach that we've ever seen, but also just the most interesting is, from They were number one in my defensive SP Plus rankings in 2009, number one in 2011, number one in 14, 15, 16, and 17. While they were remodeling that offense. They won the national title in 2015. Their offense was only 23rd in offensive SP Plus, but their defense was so absurd. They remodeled their offense and really just started remodeling the roster, it seemed like. Like I said, it seems a little more speed-based, a little less heavy each year. And over these last 4 years, they've suddenly ranked 2, 2, 1, and 4 on offense, but 7, 3, 6, and 9 on defense. Obviously still good. Like, I'm not going to pretend like their defense has fallen apart by any means, but they're no longer the best defense in the country. We assume that's going to be Clemson or Georgia in a given year. And, now they're merely the team that has a top 5 offense and top 10 defense every year, but that is different. And the way that identity shifted and they just kept right on winning is crazy. And it's something I don't think we usually, even from other amazing coaches, we haven't really seen something like that.
I guess my question is, like, even the great Nick Saban can't have like a top 3 offense and a top 3 defense, right? Is it just too much, or is it just that, guys like Kirby Smart from Georgia are taking enough of the defensive talent these days?
Yeah, I'm looking through his tenure here. They were top 3 on both sides of the ball in 2012. In 2019.
Wait, that was AJ McCarron, right?
Yeah. And
so underrated.
Yeah. McCarron's underrated. They're obviously the run game was amazing. But those were the 2 years, 2012 and 2019. When 2019, they didn't even win the title. But those are the 2 years they managed to be top 3 in both. Otherwise, they've been really, really defense heavy for a few years. And then in 2020, when they were really legitimately maybe the best team of all time, their offense was crazy, but their defense was merely the 6th best.
Merely. Bill, let's move on to Georgia. How do you replace 5 first-round picks on maybe one of the best defenses ever?
Yeah, Georgia fans are still mad at me because I said it was merely one of the 20 best defenses ever instead of the best.
Of course they are.
Yeah, it's funny. They lost 3 first-round defensive linemen, and their best guy returns. Jalen Carter was absurd last year. He led the line in tackles for loss. One of the stats I tweeted out earlier that just cracks me up every time I see it, like tackles per snap. Usually you see linebackers who maybe get that number over like 10% of snaps where they record a tackle. He was at 12%. He led the team, basically. Nakobe Dean was at 11.4%. He was at 11.7%. So he's basically, Jalen Carter's like an all-American linebacker trapped in a defensive tackle's body. But I think like that's a nice starting point right there. To have your best guy coming back somehow is a nice place to start. I will say, though, like, the defensive, the 2 deep as a whole is kind of interesting in that, Carter aside, you've got a bunch of juniors and seniors who were obviously, low 4-star at least recruits, maybe high 3s. But you basically got a lot of the slightly less touted veterans. And then, of course, the new batch of 5-star freshmen. And how that makes Nolan Smith, I guess, was a 5-star. He's still around. But a lot of the guys, the Zion Logue types and Warren Brinson, some of the veterans on the defensive line, somebody like Christopher Smith in the secondary, they were less touted. And it'll be kind of interesting to see how the freshmen, the super duper high upside freshmen kind of blend in together on the 2 deep there. I'm not really that interested, honestly, because they're going to have one of the 2 best defenses in the country, no matter what. Like, I just kind of assume it's all going to work out for them. But that is kind of interesting. Maybe that suggests a slightly lower ceiling than last year. But that I can't. I'm only so committed to that line. They still have Jalen Carter. They still have Nolan Smith. They still have Keely Ringo. The guy who had that last amazing play of the year. They're going to be very good, but it is kind of an interesting, I think there's a reason why they're 3rd in SP Plus. Just maybe the upside of those 2 other programs is better this year. I just can't even pretend to worry all that much. They're going to be really good again.
But I mean, if Georgia's upside is lower, are we still underestimating Stetson Bennett, a national title winning quarterback who has his top 3 receivers back?
Yeah, I've made it a vow to not to stop doubting Stetson Bennett. He has earned, all of last year. That was really all I was talking about with Georgia, and justifiably, because in 2020, the biggest issue Georgia had was when they had, there were basically two offenses in the country that could puncture their defense, Alabama and Florida. And when they played those teams, Bennett was forced to keep up, and he couldn't. He started making throws he couldn't make, and they both of those games got away from them. And so basically all of last year, I was like, I don't know, Bennett, when he's asked to come through, can he come through? And he really didn't in the SEC title game, at least while Alabama was making that run in the second quarter. And that was my biggest doubt. And then he goes and he plays a perfect fourth quarter, throws 2 touchdown passes, wins the national title. I'm not going to pretend to doubt him anymore. They were second in offensive SP plus last year. And I'm sure part of that was because of situation. They were always ahead. They knew they never had to take any major risk because their defense was dominant. Situation very much favored them. But with a freshman tight end, a freshman slot receiver, and a freshman receiver, when he had to make throws, as limited as those opportunities were, he made throws. So I'm not gonna. He gets the benefit of the doubt here. When I'm talking about upside, maybe I'm talking about Bennett, but really I'm talking more about the fact that he's going to still be relying on a bunch of sophomores in the skill core, and then what we were saying about the defense with the merely low 4-star guys having to come through this year. But Bennett has earned the benefit of the doubt here.
Bill, how about some teams that really intrigue you for the 2022 college football season? Maybe they're overrated, maybe a surprise team that has some talent that could be a lot better than we expect. How about some intriguing teams?
Yeah, the most intriguing thing to me overall this year is that while the top 3 stand out, you can make a case for about 20 teams being number 4. And that's pretty much like what my midsummer SP Plus projections were suggesting, is like the difference between number 3 Georgia and number 4 Michigan was the same as the difference between number 4 Michigan and number 23 Florida. Like the batch of teams there could pack some surprises, and it really does. I mean, it feels like Stockholm syndromes to a certain degree, basically saying, we already know 3 of the 4 playoff teams, but that 4th one could be amazing. That race for number 4, and before they get destroyed by the top 3, like this isn't the most thrilling off season in terms of expectations, but we really don't know who number 4 is. Michigan obviously has a case, but they have 2 new defensive ends and 2 new coordinators and plenty that could go wrong, even if I don't really expect it to. Oklahoma, they're basically projected 5th in SP Plus because of the helmets they wear and all these new pieces that they're going to be relying on. Clemson's number 6. They're going to have one of the best defenses in the country, and their offense was abysmal last year. You end up, when you think about the possibilities of this season, Notre Dame being a legit number 4 is on the table if they have the quarterback play. Utah being legit number 4 is on the table if they can find a few more big plays on offense. Miami's on the table. They could absolutely, Mario Cristobal now has the quarterback that he couldn't develop himself. And that's kind of a good situation to be in with the defensive line transfers he's brought in. Who else? Ole Miss has a ton of transfers. LSU has a ton of transfers. Of course, USC has a ton of transfers. So the mobility outside of those top 3, a lot of things could happen. And so whoever we want to pin as the most intriguing team of that batch, maybe it remains USC because of what they brought in offensively. But that's the most intriguing thing to me overall. Like Kentucky, why not Kentucky? Let's get weird. NC State, of course, like any of these teams could be the 4th or 5th best team in the country. And that's pretty fun, even if, they still lose in the playoff semifinals by 100 points.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at your rankings, right, and just trying to see who's got the best quarterback situation out of that group that could be 4th, right? I think Michigan is in a pretty strong situation simply because 2 guys could potentially be great there. Oklahoma has a little bit of an issue just because they're bringing in Dylan Gabriel, right?
It'll probably be fine, but we don't know for sure. Yeah.
Texas A&M is a great program, but big time quarterback battle. Tennessee looks like they have a pretty solid quarterback with Hendon Hooker there, right?
Yeah, there's always a team that SP Plus likes more than I wish it would. And Tennessee, their offense is going to be ridiculous. It really is. They scored, I think, 40 plus. I think it was 7 of 11 games with Hooker at quarterback, or when he started, I should say. It really did they did hang their defense out to dry a little bit. They didn't have nearly the depth they needed to have on that side of the ball. And so, like, midway through the year, they were like 24th or 26th or something in defensive SP plus. They ended up in the low 40s. They just kind of fell apart late in the year in that regard. And I think they have better experience, but basically they're projected 9th, and I would prefer it if they were projected about 16th. I would feel much better about 16th than I do top 10, even if, like I said, all those teams are really close together. That's kind of, yep.
I mean, doesn't it? I mean, I remember just looking at Tennessee's numbers midseason and be like, whoa, they look pretty good on both sides of the ball. Doesn't that suggest they have the potential on defense? Or are you not seeing it in terms of the returning production? And
no, I mean, I think the reason they're that high is because they were still, even by collapsing late in the year, they were still 47th on defense, and then they returned just about everybody. Like, their depth is unquestionably better. It's just, we gotta see that they don't fade to believe it, more or less, because they did go from, looking at the score, like they allowed 20, they were allowing it in the 20s, like 20 to South Carolina and 24 to Missouri, which isn't amazing, but it's pretty good. And then, 52 to Alabama, 42 to Kentucky, 48 to Purdue in the bowl game. It certainly trended in the wrong direction there. So undoubtedly they have potential, but like I said, I'd like them to be a little, and it's probably just because they're Tennessee and knowing that we've stepped on this rake before, but it is, they absolutely have potential. I just wish they were in the teens.
And then the other team that you mentioned that I find interesting is Utah. Cameron Rising took over game 4 last year, and the quarterback completely changed their offense. And, would we be looking at this team differently had they just triple team Jackson Smith-Njigba in the Rose Bowl? Like, he was, the kid went nuts, and you think you might triple team him when your two other top receivers on the team decided not to play to get ready for the NFL draft. So what's going on out in Salt Lake City?
Well, it is hard to triple team a slot guy.
Isn't it?
And not just completely, because Marvin Harrison Jr. also caught 3 touchdown passes in that game. So, I think it's pretty much, they give you impossible solutions. But that said, I do think just the simple fact that they scored 40 plus and almost beat Ohio State has done plenty for their profile this year. They're probably going to be, I don't remember where they were in the coaches poll, but I think it was single digits or very close to it. They're going to be, I think they've earned an appropriate amount of respect, and now it's up to them to show that they're actually top 5, that lots of experience. And Cam Rising really was really, really fun combination of accuracy and good decision-making and really fun scrambling. We have scramble numbers, and he averaged 9 yards per scramble last year while doing it a pretty decent amount of the time. Now, the running guys are going to get hit a lot, and he got hurt in the bowl game and could get hurt again. But I think the biggest issue for them, or the two biggest issues, I mentioned big plays. They have one guy who makes big plays, Donovan Veely. I think that's how you say it. They have a big 6'5" receiver. He averaged 17 yards a catch, caught 23 balls last year. The two guys who actually caught passes averaged like 10, 11 yards per catch. And so a little more big play potential would go a long way. Just a few more easy points, basically. And then, the defense was merely good. They were 22nd in defense last year. They have been higher than that under Kyle Whittingham before. They'll need to be top 15, but they lost some guys that projected 31st. That's going to be the other major thing. A few more big plays and a really good Whittingham defense as opposed to a good Whittingham defense. That's why they're not in the top 5 now. But they absolutely could be.
Bill, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned how college football brings you joy because of the unexpected. And one of those unexpected things could be just insane player performances. Let's talk about the Heisman. I'm interested in it kind of because saw some interesting data about how you should never bet the favorite. That hasn't worked out in the past. So maybe give us some players that could be dark horses to win college football's biggest award.
Well, it is tricky this year because the favorites this year are more proven, I think, than in a normal year. Obviously, you have the defending Heisman winner coming back, which we kind of know. We raised the bar on defending Heisman winners, and Bryce Young is going to have to throw for like 6,000 yards to win again. But he is still very, very good, and he's still going to have really fast guys around him. So he's one of the favorites, and that makes sense. It's one of the things that I'm struggling to grasp when it comes to the Heisman race is basically Ohio State has 3 guys on the list on offense.
And maybe the most talented one is has the longest odds.
Right. Like CJ Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Travion Henderson are all going to be on any Heisman list here in the preseason. And they're going to split votes to some degree, right? Like that's not going to help any of them. Kind of like I figured the reason Smith-Njigba didn't win the Biletnikoff last year is he had 2 other receivers that, some voters were going to think was the best of the bunch. So, that helped Addison out a lot in that race. Those are the best players overall, best offensive players. But I'm going to continue to call Will Anderson a dark horse. I'm going to just bang this drum nonstop. He's Derek Thomas 2.0. He was the best defensive player we've seen in college football in a few years last year. And he should have won last year. He wasn't even the highest ranked defensive player on the list last year, which is crazy. But I would say that no matter how proven he is, a defensive player is always going to be a dark horse. And he qualifies, I think. But his what he does in terms of pass rush and just disruption, even on the run, is just almost unprecedented, or at least in recent college football. And he should be getting more hype than he has.
Well, and let me just jump in and say that, we can talk about how defensive players don't win, but Aiden Hutchinson wins the Heisman last year if Bryce Young does not perform against Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Quite possibly. And that, again, is crazy to me because I would take Will Anderson every single day of the week. But it was an interesting. He did what you're supposed to do in terms of Heisman moments and peaking late or making plays in the biggest games, I should say. So it was an interesting race in that regard. But yeah, if Young is merely good in the SEC title game, I'm not real sure how that changes. But if they lose the SEC title game, that becomes
they were 6-point dogs, right?
That sounds about right. Yeah. That's it. Could have been different. And I will say, Bryce Young wasn't the quote unquote most outstanding player in college football for a decent percentage of the year. But yeah, no, it was kind of interesting in that regard. I just, give me Anderson every single day. Aiden Hutchinson put up good defensive end stats, really good defensive end stats. Anderson put up stats I haven't seen before. So that's the difference to me. But I do think if you're crafting a dark horse list, basically what you do is you look at the other projected top teams and you figure out which quarterbacks we're not talking about. Like Ohio State and Alabama, obviously we're talking about their quarterbacks, but hey, Stetson Bennett, maybe he if he repeats and Georgia's somehow even better this year, AJ McCarron almost won the Heisman, and I would say that Bennett will at least get some votes, even if an actual win maybe seems a bit of a stretch. Cade McNamara or whoever starts for Michigan. That could be pretty interesting, but I think you'd probably have to look at Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma. You probably have to, Cam Rising. Why not Cam Rising at Utah? He's going to be interesting. Hendon Hooker is a super dark horse, but if Tennessee really does have like a top 4 offense and they beat a couple teams, couple good teams, that is, I could see him getting some votes because his stat line is going to be pretty egregious. So those are some interesting names, I would say. I do think even if we assume Bryce Young doesn't win because guys don't repeat, it is going to be the Ohio State guys splitting votes is going to make things pretty interesting regardless, I think.
Excellent. All right, Bill, you run a ton of analytics during the preseason. Is that pointing you towards maybe any college football win total you like or game spread for the week 0 and 1?
I'll have a big win total piece after we put out the updated projections here in another week or so.
Nice.
But I will say my general rule is under anything that's 11 wins or over, bet the under. 10.5, maybe bet the under too. Anything that's 2.5, bet the over. That's the general the general rule. You're going to win more than you lose doing that, even if you're going to get like Ohio State wrong or something.
Right. Absolutely.
No, I think, from a numbers standpoint, obviously, if you know where the projections have them and where the win totals have them, USC is a pretty obvious under. But otherwise, we'll see. We'll see what the final numbers say.
Okay, so USC 9.5 wins. Yeah, you actually have them pretty low, 51st, right? So tell me more about that.
Uncomfortably low. I mean, bottom line is, the projections I put together each year, I'm very happy with them. They would have, if you bet every single game that every single win projection SP Plus had last year, you'd have won like 61% of them.
Nice.
On the ones that SP Plus disagreed by more than a win, it was like 71% or something. Like the win totals are good, or the projections are good for SP Plus, but what we have not seen, like my model is not equipped to handle a team signing 19, not only signing 19 transfers, but signing one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best receivers in the country, high profile 5-star transfers.
Right.
So you look at USC at 51st, you look at LSU, where are they? They're 36th. Ole Miss even. Like those teams are kind of unprojectable at the moment because we don't know what the impact will be of having that much, not only that much new blood, but high quality new blood. And, culture still matters, chemistry still matters, but we don't know how much if you have that much talent coming in. So USC is not going to be the 51st best team in the country. They're going to be better than that. But, the fact that they spent most of the offseason with like the 5th best national title odds is crazy. Like they still have to play defense, and they did not sign the Caleb Williams and Addison of defense this year. And so that's going to hold them back. I like that they were in the double digits. What were they, like 12th in the coaches poll? That kind of that made some sense to me. I can see that, even if it's still maybe a little higher than I would prefer. But from a win total standpoint, SP Plus is obviously going to come in way lower than whatever the number is at right now, 9.5.
So Jordan Addison, I wanted to ask you about him.
Yeah.
Amazing. Just how good was he, right? Like how much of the credit for Kenny Pickett's year last year can we give to having Jordan Addison around?
Yeah, he's very, I do think, there is right now in college football, you can scheme your way to success if you have particularly good like slot receivers and tight ends. That was pretty much Georgia's offense last year. They had McConkey at slot and Bowers and tight end, and they could steal 6, 8, 10, 12 yards in a lot of different ways just with those guys, even though they weren't getting a lot from the wideout position. With Pitt, with Pitt and Ohio State having Smith and Jigba there, with Pitt having Addison there. Special talents, and I don't think defenses have necessarily caught up with really fun ways to use slot receivers yet. So that helped him, but he was obviously good. 3 yards per route run, 16 yards per catch, even though he was far and away the number one target. After a while, defenses know what you're going to do, and he was still getting open and producing a lot of yards. So obviously very, very good. I personally would have probably voted for either Smith and Jigba or Jamison Williams for the Biletnikoff, but I'm never going to complain about a Pitt guy getting an award over an Ohio State or Alabama guy. That's, more of that is probably more fun for college football. So yeah, I don't think he's the best receiver in the country, but he's one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in the country.
Right. But now he's a top 5 receiver in Lincoln Riley's system. I don't know. I mean, could he overshadow Caleb Williams, and then there's some value at 80-1 for Jordan Addison and the Heisman?
Well, 80-1 is pretty high, isn't it? That is kind of an interesting thought. It will be hard because it's Caleb Williams. And because, the hype he suddenly got after about 3 games last year, I think it's going to be hard to overshadow him. But obviously, if he's throwing, a receiver can still do it if, it's a situation, an Alabama type situation where he really is not only coming through when you need him to, but in the most high visibility games that USC plays, which I guess are Utah and Notre Dame, we'll say, maybe UCLA too. if in those games he has 235 receiving yards, then that's basically the only way I think you can overshadow your quarterback. But he can do it.
Right. Bill, you also cover international soccer for ESPN, and we're in a perfect position to overreact to what we saw in 1 week in the Bundesliga and the Premier League. So maybe give me some takeaways from what you saw this past weekend.
Did you know that I have a piece coming out later today called Overreactions to week one of the...
I actually don't think I knew that.
That's impressive, though. It is fun to overreact, even though we kind of know how things are going to end. I think as far as...
I don't know.
Huh?
But well, do we know how they're going to end?
I mean...
The best team has not won Champions League the last couple of years. So.
Well, yeah, we don't. The Champions League is still a tournament. That's why. The leagues, sure. we probably know what's going to happen in league play. I'd
that makes me sad about Germany, though.
I maybe we'll call this an overreaction, even though it's a very reality-based overreaction. I spent a good portion of the offseason. I went to Germany in May, wrote a bunch of pieces, talked myself into basically all of Bayern's challengers this year being better. Borussia Dortmund, who really could be better, like Nico Schlotterbeck, signing him in defense that's going to be enormous for them. He put out some fires in the first game against Leverkusen.
He did. Yep.
But outside of Dortmund, I was really hoping Leverkusen could take a nice step forward. They retained most of last year's key talent. They were really fun in the way that they played kind of conservative defense. They didn't press. They were basically trying to coax you down the field so that they could counterattack, and they were really good at it. So they have this weird kind of possession-based counter-attacking kind of approach that worked really well for them. They have not started the year off as I hoped. They lose to a third division team in the first round of the cup, and then they really, I think it was closer to being 2-0 against Dortmund than it was 1-1.
Right, but I would argue that Leverkusen completely outplayed them on the road in the second half.
Second half, yeah, I could see that. Dortmund it's going to be interesting to see them trying to learn game management this year in not just attacking, but actually, trying to preserve leads and whatnot. And again, they've upgraded their defensive talent at the very least. But yeah, Leverkusen certainly had some chances at least. So yeah, maybe I'm being now overly negative after learning my lesson a little bit, but, They do still have ridiculous attacking talent. And RB Leipzig has now added maybe the best fullback in Germany in David Raum. But he just came aboard and we don't know quite yet, how that's going to go. And they just added Timo Werner again. So maybe they've got the pieces. Problem is Bayern without Robert Lewandowski has now said, well, we're just going to attack from every possible direction with every possible attacker. And we're going to go out and score 5 goals a game. They come out against 2 of the best German. They played 2 matches without Lewandowski against 2 of the teams that defended the best in Germany last year, which, that's a curve. We're grading on a curve. But they come out and score 11 goals in 2 matches, and that's ridiculous. So even if those other challenges are better, Bayern might be even better this year, and that's stupid. That's a stupid thing to say.
It is. What did you make of Erling Haaland in his Man City debut? Not too bad, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I went back and looked at how Manchester City did against West Ham in 2 matches last year, and I think they scored twice in both matches. They generated 2.5 to 3 expected goals. With Erling Haaland, in this match, they scored twice with about 2.5 to 3 expected goals. It was basically the same thing. It was just all funneled towards one guy, and it's going to be interesting to see long term if that really makes them better or not. Because I mean, what we saw from him was just a reminder of how easily he can create chances, especially when you've got guys like De Bruyne and Grealish feeding and Gundogan feeding him the ball. It's so easy, especially in those transition moments where he's got room to gallop into free space. But Yeah, we don't necessarily know if this makes them better, if it just means that more of the goals are going to one guy. That's kind of my question there. He's going to score 40 if he stays healthy. Even against Liverpool, he had 2 or 3, like he missed them. And that was the story, was that he missed the chances. The story should have been that he had 3 very high quality chances out of nowhere against Liverpool. He's going to have those chances, and he's going to put most of them in the net. And his goal total is going to be ridiculous. It's just a question of whether it makes them better or not.
Well, and if he can stay healthy. So
right.
We'll put that out there.
And, 2 years ago, that wasn't a problem. Last year was a problem. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
And then, Bill, I'm just going to throw one hot take by you before we wrap up this show. Real Madrid is overrated. I think they're old. I think they got incredibly lucky to score. I don't know. How many goals did they score against Man City to knock them out of the Champions League in the semifinal? I don't see a ton of young talent to replace what's going on. I mean, they're the La Liga favorites, but I don't know. I just think we're a little bit too high on.
That's the Barcelona fan in you coming out. I know it. No, they are.
This is why I'm asking you this, Bill.
No, I think they should absolutely start off the season as the favorites, but. Like they were, as far as Champions League goes, they should not be the favorites, because it took some magic. It was funny. We got a nice, fun underdog clutch story out of the Champions League last year, and it was Real Madrid.
That's kind of hilarious. Yeah.
That was mean. Like, we saw what could have happened. Like, that could have been, I don't know, Bayer Leverkusen. Well, Leverkusen wasn't in it. That could have been a Dortmund or a Leipzig or somebody that we don't usually see. And instead it was the team that has won the tournament the most. But no, you are right in that, Champions League wise, they did come up with a lot of clutchitude that will be very hard to replicate. And they are old and will probably have more injuries this year. They survived. Like, Casemiro was hurt at a pretty inopportune moment, but they still survived it. Assuming Barcelona can actually register their new signings, because La Liga is being mean and not letting them pretend money isn't real. Like, we have debt. Let's solve our debt problem by spending more. Assuming they end up being able to register their signings, it wouldn't surprise me if Barcelona won the league title just because of injuries and things like that this year.
I know, but now they have Lewandowski. I think that's a great signing that really enhances their ceiling. But, maybe it doesn't matter, because Bayern certainly doesn't seem to miss him so far.
Right. And he doesn't, he's not Ronaldo in this regard, but he is getting older and pressing less. And so it is kind of interesting when you're trying to play a modern kind of possession-based, high defensive line kind of style, and the hub, the guy right up at the very front, isn't pressing all that much. So obviously Bayern overcame him last year, but each year that goes by, he's going to press a little less, and maybe that's an issue, but I doubt it. He's really, really good at scoring goals.
And then last thing, I mean, didn't Barcelona need to get rid of some guys to make their finances work, right?
Yes.
I mean, they were supposed to move De Jong, and he still seems like he's on that roster.
Yeah, it is a massive insult to Manchester United that basically De Jong has been presented with, you can either leave from Manchester United or you can stay, and we're going to shame you until you agree to cut your salary in half, because that's how good businesses are run. We're going to sign all these guys to contracts and then just shame them publicly until they agree to cut their salaries so we can sign more expensive guys later. Given that option so far, he has remained at Barcelona, even though apparently the fans are turning on him, because Barcelona it really is gross. Like, they're going to be so fun to watch this year, but the way they've gone about this has just been not fun to experience, or not fun to witness. So we'll see what happens. He could end up at Chelsea, it sounds like, as well.
Right.
But yes, they knew coming into the season they needed to cut payroll and sell some the rights to some players if they want to actually register guys for league play, and they decided to just sign more guys and sell nobody. And
right, which is crazy.
That's something's going to have to give here in the final days.
I mean, maybe De Jong didn't want to go to Manchester United because that team might be kind of a mess.
Right. He has watched Manchester United over the last 5 to 10 years. It makes sense. It's just kind of wild that he has continued to stay at Barcelona.
Yeah, no. The Man U game was interesting. They didn't start Ronaldo, created almost zero opportunities, at least what I could tell from the highlights. Yeah. And not a good team. So
yeah, Brighton could be mid-table, but you still, right, they were very disorganized. They did not the modern aspects of pressing or whatever. Even without starting Ronaldo, they didn't have it, and they didn't create much. Like it was a reminder that you can't, a manager change alone. And a couple signings were in the lineup, but it takes a while. You still had McTominay and Fred in midfield. You still had just a lot of the pieces of a lot of the symbols of recent underachievement in the lineup, and it's going to take a while.
Yeah, here's my last hot take before I let you go, Bill. I think Jadon Sancho is overrated. I thought this when he was at Dortmund. I don't think he's going to be a savior for them. I think he's a good player, but I mean, I don't necessarily think he's one of the top wingers in the world.
As a humongous Bundesliga proponent, I will admit that, the style of play there, the fact that there were more wide open teams, the quote unquote Bundesliga tax is real. I'm not sure it applies to Haaland because he's so gifted in so many ways. But as far as Sancho goes, yeah, like just going from a Borussia Dortmund style to any other style was going to result in a downgrade of his stats. I guess I'm not convinced that he's not going to be one of the best wingers in the world pretty soon. But obviously, he's been at Manchester United for like 12 months. He's on his third coach. His natural talent has not saved him in a league where every single team is a little different from all the others. It really is kind of a stylistically deeper league and obviously financially deeper too. So,
I mean, when I think of like best wingers in the world, I think of like what Eden Hazard did to the U.S. national team in whatever that World Cup was, where he just single-handedly destroyed them. And I guess I've seen enough of Sancho that I just don't see him getting to that level.
Yeah, maybe the best way to think about this is this probably confirms he's not one of the best in the world, just because style matters for him. You can't just put him on any team and he's going to carry that team. And plenty of other wingers. He can't
be a good player. It's just
right. He's not. Mo Salah is technically a winger, and he does a little more than Sancho does. There are plenty of more high impact guys like that. You are right about that. I think his ceiling is still immense, but at this moment, he's definitely not one of, wherever we're drawing that line, 4 or 6 best wingers. He's definitely not part of that. That's for sure.
Bill Connelly, thank you so much for your time during this very busy month of August for you. Please let everyone know where they can find all your good work.
Best place is the Twitter feed. That's ESPN _Bill C. That'll be anything I do will show up there one way or the other. So we'll start there.
Excellent. Are you still doing that like Google Doc with all your articles?
Yeah, like basically the little bio link in my Twitter feed is a doc with everything that I've written for ESPN. Yeah.
Awesome. And so that includes college football, Bundesliga, maybe some other football this fall too?
We'll see exactly what the schedule ends up being, but plenty of college football, plenty of soccer, a little bit of tennis here and there, plenty of stuff.
Bill, thanks again for your time.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. Another thanks to Bill Connelly for coming on. He's one of the few guests I have on every year, and I think you understand why after listening to that conversation. This Sunday, August 14th, I will be launching a Patreon for you to support the podcasts. This helps me with a bunch of costs, things like editing, hosting the podcast, and then hiring talented people like Edward Egros to help me make some of these podcast episodes. If you don't want to support the podcast, that's not a problem at all. The podcast is going to remain free. This includes all the interviews that I do. It also includes the preview series, the series of short everyday episodes that I do before the start of every football season that will happen again in 2022, and also the Bracket Wisdom series. But if you do want to support the podcast, you may want to consider joining the Patreon Sunday when it launches. The first 20 people to sign up will get a special bonus. In addition, when you sign up, there will be a patron-only episode about home and rest advantage in football. There will be an episode on Sunday, August 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific with all the details. Also, for the launch of this Patreon, I'm also going to be sending an email to my email list. Again, this is the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. You can sign up there at thepowerrank.com. Of course, you'll get all my other good sports betting information that I put in that newsletter. Once again, there's going to be a special bonus for the first 20 people to sign up for the Patreon. It's going to launch Sunday, August 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to this episode. My name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show, and I'll talk to you again soon.